think the challenge, we know what to do. The challenge, of course, is actually implementing it. And Daniel, I'm going to ask you to address that. Is, we have the plan. It's a very ambitious plan. Now, how do you actually make it happen? Whether it's in New York or for other cities, we'll have to deal with the same thing.
I think a good part of the implementation is making sure that people understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so releasing the plan that we did in June is, of course, the first step in that. But continuing to have this conversation around why we're doing what we're doing and why it's important, I think needs to keep up. One of the key points that we've there was a Quinnipiac poll after our plan was released that showed that 74% of New Yorkers supported the plan that we released, and I think we took that really to heart. That people did trust in the system, in the process that we went through to come up with science-based solutions that were cost-effective, that were ambitious, but could be achieved. And they understood that the why we were doing it. I think it's a challenge for us to keep that number at such a high level. One of the important points about that number that I say a lot is that it feels like a nonpartisan number in a lot of ways. And of course, as we're heading into an election, there's going to be an opportunity to rethink some of the plans that we've laid. We think as a city, we've laid our market down on what we need to achieve and how we need to move our plans forward. But we are coming up in 3.5 short months to a change. And so it's going to be incumbent upon us, all of us really, to explain why these items are important, why we need to strengthen our infrastructure, why we need to build social and economic resiliency in our neighborhoods, and how that's going to help us weather the storms of the future and weather the future climate risks that we do expect to face.
Richard?
Well, I think we're not going to announce anything here today, but we are in process of implementing different pieces of a puzzle that we're talking about. And so I can give you some little bits of some of the dots that we might be able to connect. So we can start in Long Island, which was certainly an affected community, and Governor announced after Sandy that LIPA was broken and needed to be fixed and changed. And so part of that change is to have a different operator that's going to operate the utility, and as part of that contract, which is going to start at January next year, is a plan towards working towards what we're calling Utility 2.0, which is going to have an emphasis on distributed solutions and more resiliency. So we can have over time a real meaningfully large scale example of how Long Island can operate differently. And even just on Long Island has to replace old peaker plants. And so rather than just doing it the way that it did in the past, which is to have an RFP for new gas peakers, the RFP will ask the market to come up with a whole range of other kinds of possible solutions. It could be ice storage, it could be batteries, it could be solar, it could be any number of things to deal with the question of peak power. Because peak power we have as one of the issues, of course, with climate change is summers get hotter, which means we need more peak power. And so the whole system requires more and more capital to be built. I think on the question of community grids, it's something we're working with the city on. Are there some areas that would make sense to take the next step in trying to figure out how we might actually have some kind of experiment? And the last thing is we've set up a green bank, or in the process of setting up a $1 billion green bank. And I said before, one of the things we need to work out is the financing. I'm not saying that one of these imagined new utilities is not financeable. I think it may be economic, but it may not be financeable. In other words, the financing instruments may need to be adapted from other markets, other financial markets to this sector. So an example would be, we've all landed at JFK and looked down or any other airport, and you look down and you see lots of warehouses and flat rooftops, and they don't have any solar on them. So why is that? It's not because the projects are not economic, but they're not financeable. You can't get debt for those kinds of projects. So the Green Bank can help provide some financing in partnership with a private sector financial institution so that we can provide financing. And that's an example of a whole range of financing instruments that will be needed to support this kind of more competitive access energy system.
I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. We still have a few minutes if anyone is there down the middle. Do you have a microphone, or should we just, this is coming up to you.
Yes, my name is Joyce Coffey, and I'm with ND Global Adaptation Index. This question is primarily for Dr. Rodin and Mr. Ryan. I'm interested in how the lessons from Sandy are helping you to incent community and corporate resiliency in other emerging economies where you work.
I actually think that the emerging economies in many places are ahead of us. They have focused and been really battered by the effects of climate change for a very long time, whether we're talking about rural areas that are flooded routinely or have several cycles of drought even within a single growing season, or cities. Someone mentioned Bangkok in the earlier discussion. Certainly Bangkok had not only floods, but Bangkok had unbelievably poor planning, which is true of many cities in the developing world. So it couldn't clear the flooding effectively because roads had been built over canals that in earlier periods, even before the impact of climate change. We have built a network called the Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network. We've also worked with Swiss Re and McKinsey on several diagnostics for many of these cities. And so we think we're way further ahead in some of the most vulnerable cities in South and Southeast Asia than we may be in the Northeast, even with our mega resources here. Rockefeller has also launched a new challenge for our centennial called 100 Resilient Cities. And when you think about the pent-up need, we actually have been very struck. We just opened the registration at the end of August. It goes until the end of this week. And we've had 836 cities so far apply, cities from around the world. And so there is a huge felt need on the part of cities, and many of these cities are in the developed world and many of them in the United States. So if we can leverage the learning, and not every city has to relearn from the start. New York was very, I think, embraced by Rotterdam and the Dutch, and also New Orleans and what it had learned. But not every city gets those kinds of expert resources when it has these kinds of events. So leveraging that, networking it, and really using some knowledge already from some of these best practices. It's the reason that I'm so bullish on the fact that low-cost solutions are part of the solution, because we've seen in such poorly resourced areas the enormous improvement in resilience, even with very low-cost investments.
And I would echo that. The take-up and enthusiasm in the emerging markets, we see it across our global partners business. There's whether it's the financial problem isn't as large or the political barriers aren't quite as significant, they're much more open to innovative solutions, and there's much less debate about whether we have a problem or not. It's a very interesting, very constructive, solutions and policies being implemented.
Syria, right.
Hi, Ron Leonard from Eco Energy. I've been in the business of renewable energy for about 35 years, and maybe there's a Brooklyn institution that sort of plays to what you're talking about, and by that I mean the dopes lab. I think that we've sort of gotten hit by Sandy and have a realization that things have changed elementally. You know, when we had the blackout in 2003, there were 50 phaser units in existence. we didn't even know what areas of Brooklyn, Queens, or Long Island were out of power at that point. Now there are 1,000 supposedly going to be installed. We had emergency shelters in New York City that had no generators. Well, wouldn't make much difference after 2 days because we didn't get gasoline for the generator. The public sort of has gotten the feeling that we don't have faith in the institution, the utility and the government, to keep us going in the event of a failure. Can we recover that basic trust again? And can we make wise investments as Judith and Richard have told us we need to do?
Who wants to take that? Daniel, Richard, or Gary? You're on.
Maybe I'll start if it's okay, because I think that Judith talked about communities, and I think that one of the really great things that we have learned, and it's not just in the post-Sandy thing, I think we're seeing it in all kinds of parts in our society where you trust either your physical community or your virtual community to tell you, what restaurant you want to go to, because it's you have more confidence in your community than you have in institutions. And so I think this is actually an incredibly encouraging development, because what we've seen in the energy area is when those towns decide that they want to solarize themselves, what that means is that a community decides that they want to have more solar, means that the town agrees that they're going to have a competition and picks a solar provider. What that means is that the cost of the solar installations go down because you now have a critical mass of projects. And in addition to that, the whole social pressure, as it were, to get more people involved in joining the club also has effects. So there's more solar adoption. And the same thing is happening in New York State with a community group that is working on energy efficiency, residential energy efficiency, called Energize New York. So I think that the participation of communities and what communities can do in helping to advance this new vision is really at its center.
I think one thing that the public can really take away from these events is that we learn from all of them, and we really carefully assess them to understand what the lessons are. And in many ways, I think we're at a stage in communications among the first responders, among the federal assets that are there for those kinds of challenges, and state and local assets, to really have a level of response that's quite extraordinary, and obviously not always able to predict every twist and turn. One of the things that I think we're effectively doing post-Sandy as well is looking at what are some best practices that then can be deployed in communities across the country. So, and we were talking about internationally, but let me give you two examples. One is the health sector. Every community has a hospital and a nursing home and care facilities, and what are some of the challenges that were faced after Hurricane Sandy? What are some of the things that are best practices that we can begin to learn, and how do we then deploy that information, working closely between government and that private sector in that industry to be able to take steps to make facilities more resilient around the country? The power sector. How do we think about in cities across the country the lessons from Sandy and really deploy those? And I think that that's a really valuable piece of what's happened here. And obviously we have a very long way to go. One of the things I'd say, really two things, is we may never be able to have a complete plan that gives us absolute assurance, nor may we have absolutely perfect information, but we have enough information to take steps that enhance our level of resilience, and there are enough things that we can do that are productive that will make a huge difference. So rather than be just stymied because we might not be able to get it absolutely perfect based upon the most perfect information, nonetheless, there is a huge amount that we still can do.
I've often thought that we ought to step up one more level. These are catastrophic events, and they are causing enormous loss of life and property and the like. And if you think about what we finally did after airplane crashes and train crashes and created the National Transportation Safety Board that really deeply analyzes what happened and then monitors implementation of strategies and recommendations across all levels, whether it's the private sector or what government needs to do. And with all due respect, I'm sure we are analyzing these things and trying to learn from them, but a more systematic approach to that analysis and some teeth in monitoring the implementation, I think would give citizens, which is your question, confidence that we really are learning the lessons, we're implementing the changes, and therefore reducing the likelihood that some of these things happen again, at least in the same way.